The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for calling in for today's webinar, Finding Indoor airPLUS Compliant Low Emission Materials. We'll get started in just a minute, but first we want to make sure you understand how to use your toolbar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. If you're having any logistical issues, you can also let us know through that window, and we'll do our best to help you resolve the issue. There will be a question and answer period following the presentation, and we will respond to your questions then as time allows. Please feel free to type in your questions at any point during the course of the presentation. While we're doing introductions, we're going to take a quick audience poll to see who has joined the webinar today and get your general familiarity with Indoor airPLUS. The first poll should be on your screen now, so please let us know which of the following apply to your profession, and you can select any and all that apply. I'll leave this up for a few seconds. My name is Kat Kudlewski. I'm with ICF International, speaking to you today on behalf of the EPA's Indoor airPLUS program. I'm joined today by the presenters Nick Hurst with ICF International and Bob Axelrad, the Indoor airPLUS program manager at EPA. Bob has a long history at EPA and a lot of great background to share regarding low emission materials and how they apply to Indoor airPLUS. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and then I'm going to give it a few more seconds. 80% of you guys have voted so far. Okay, I'm going to close this poll. I'm going to open up one more. I've opened up one more poll that'll help us understand who in the audience is currently an Indoor airPLUS partner and whether you're currently building or rating Indoor airPLUS homes. It should be on your screen now, so please select any and all that apply. All attendees of the webinar today will receive a copy of the slides at the conclusion, and this webinar is also being recorded and will be posted online later. Also, please note that you can download a copy of the Indoor airPLUS construction specifications and the low emission products resource that we'll be discussing in the attachment sections of the GoToWebinar interface for reference at any time during the presentation. So please go ahead and make your selections on this polling question if you haven't already, and I'll close it in just a few more seconds. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bob to get started.
All right, thanks very much, Kat. This is Bob Axelrad at EPA. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have a lot of interest in low emission materials that comply with Indoor airPLUS over the course of the last few years. We've got lots of questions about it. We had a session at ResNet this past February in which we focused on this, so we thought it would be a good idea to hold a webinar to give folks an opportunity to kind of get a little deeper into the subject. And so we're going to try to cover pretty efficiently a little background on why we have low emission material requirements in Indoor airPLUS. We're going to talk a little bit about VOC and product labeling basics. It's a fairly complicated field on one level. On another level, you'll find when we get into how to actually find these compliant products that they're a lot more widely available than you may have previously thought. If you know where to look, they are accessible, and hopefully Nick, when he walks you through this resource that is online and also in your panel for the webinar, you can download this document to the right as well as the construction specifications so that you'll have these to work with. Hopefully many of you have already been using it. We'll talk a little bit about some other additional resources, and then our hope is that we're going to finish in plenty of time for some Q&A. We're assuming that all of you on this webinar have some knowledge of indoor airPLUS, because we're digging in here to a very specific piece of the overall program. But this one slide is for the few that may not be fully oriented to what indoor airPLUS is. As I'm sure 90% of you know, this is a companion label to the Energy Star label that adds some additional source controls for some specific pollutant types onto the already very sound building science foundation that is the Energy Star program. And so the 6 major areas that we cover in terms of pollutants are radon, pests, materials or product emissions, HVAC, moisture, and combustion pollutants. And today we're just going to focus on the materials, which is section 6. The construction specifications are very important for everyone to have and utilize whenever they are trying to either develop specifications for a home that are compliant, or you're rating a home. You need to really know what the specific language is in the specifications themselves. So while the checklist is helpful and the resource for things like the emissions is helpful, none of it is a substitute for the spec. So revision 3 is the latest spec. We put that out last fall, right after Energy Star revision 8 came out, and so everything is aligned with Energy Star revision 8. Okay, so let's start with, it seems like an easy question, but it's actually really complicated, and that's what are VOCs? Because VOCs are essentially what section 6 are all about. There are, as I'm going to tell you about in a minute, there are multiple definitions of VOCs, but in general, this is a large group of carbon-based chemicals that easily evaporate at room temperature. That's kind of the basic definition. Examples include many that you've heard of: acetone, benzene, formaldehyde, perchloroethylene. There are thousands of VOCs that are present in a variety of products and that are emitted or off-gas from those products over time, and are generally much higher when the product is new, higher when the product is wet applied, and diminish over time, but can continue for months or even years, and some for many years at very low levels. So this is all about trying to produce homes with products that release the least harmful and the least quantity of VOCs. There are a lot of complexities to levels in homes. It's not easy to really ascertain what levels you may have at any given time, because there are lots of things in play: the amount of the VOC, the rate of release of the VOC, and that can be affected by things like temperature and humidity, room volume, ventilation rate. All of these things impact the degree to which VOCs may build up in a home. There are studies from quite a long time ago, actually, but there are studies of VOCs in homes, and that have consistently shown that levels can be 2 to 5 times higher than outdoors for VOCs that are present indoors, typically because of an indoor source. And immediately after use of some products like an aerosol, you're going to have very high levels and potentially very high exposures to some of these VOCs. We don't know everything we would like to know about VOCs. We know a fair bit about some. We know next to nothing about others. We do know that a lot of them have the potential to cause health effects that are both acute and short-term, which are things like sensory irritation, headaches, dizziness, nausea, allergies, asthma, as well as chronic and long-term effects, and those include an increased risk of cancer and potential for liver, kidney, central nervous system damage. So whether or not an individual VOC is going to cause harm or potential health effect to an individual is also unpredictable to a large extent. So much of what we do in indoor environments is do our best to try to keep levels of all contaminants as low as you reasonably can. And low-emitting materials are one of several ways of trying to keep pollutant levels down. Formaldehyde I'm going to touch on because a good chunk of Section 6 addresses formaldehyde emissions. I think everyone is quite aware that formaldehyde is probably the most widely recognized by name of VOCs that are out there, partly because it's so widely used in building materials and household products. And it's also ubiquitous in nature. It's naturally produced and forms through a variety of processes, including combustion of fuels. So you will always have some level of formaldehyde indoors and out. The issue is whether or not you have levels of formaldehyde that are significantly elevated and pose potential risks. In 1992, California Air Resources Board first identified formaldehyde as a toxic air contaminant and decided there was no safe level of exposure. IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, has concluded that it's a known carcinogen. EPA considers it a probable carcinogen at this point. Formaldehyde has been linked to lots of different kinds of effects in the near term, exacerbation of asthma in those who are formaldehyde sensitive and possibly other asthmatics as well. It is known to cause eye, nose, and respiratory irritation and difficulty breathing and nausea. So formaldehyde is a bad actor. You've all heard the lumber liquidators and the issues that go around episodes of high formaldehyde levels, generally from composite wood products. It goes back to the FEMA trailer issue several years ago, and periodically these things crop up. So formaldehyde is clearly one of the actors we're trying to address here. So the field, as I think many of you are aware, because we know less than we'd like to about health effects of VOCs and measuring them poses challenges, as it's really a complicated and evolving field. And so the programs and labels and certifications that have evolved in part because of the history of how VOCs have been treated over the course of several years. And this slide is going to be an important one for people to sort of get the distinction between why VOCs, as they are regulated, are not necessarily all of the VOCs that we care about in the indoor air. But VOCs have been regulated under the Clean Air Act for decades, and the South Coast Air Quality Management District in California has been regulating VOCs for decades. But the Clean Air Act really is only regulating the VOCs that react with sunlight to form ground level ozone in outdoor air. They are not at all concerned in the Clean Air Act about indoor air pollutants. And this is simply because when the Clean Air Act was passed, indoor air just wasn't even on their radar. It just didn't even get considered. And as a result, there are VOCs that are exempt from the Clean Air Act, but are still of concern potentially indoors. And these are things like perchloroethylene, which is the commonly used chemical used in dry cleaning, methylene chloride that's used in lots of different consumer products, paint strippers, cleaners, a whole range of products, and acetone, which is a very, very common solvent widely used in a great many household products. These are things which are exempt from the Clean Air Act. So when we start talking about some of the programs that have evolved around low VOC or no VOC, in many of those cases they're only talking about the VOCs that are regulated under the Clean Air Act. So the upshot of all of this is that because the early standards for low emission products were only concerned with not exceeding the regulatory VOC limits, what happened is most of the programs in the early years, and we're talking 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, really what they were concerned with is what was the content of a particular product in terms of the amount of VOC that was going into the product, either by weight or by volume. But again, only concerned with those VOCs that are actually regulated, not the entire universe of VOCs. And so they were concerned with total volatiles, or TVOC as some of you have heard the term, but they weren't paying attention to the individual VOCs that are actually emitted into indoor air. They were concerned with the total amount that might be emitted to the atmosphere to form ground level ozone in the outdoor air. So in indoor air, we're concerned with a very different population, and those are the populations who are spending 80 or 90% of their time in their homes, in their schools, and in other buildings. And we are concerned not just with what may be given off of a product in terms of total volatiles, but we're concerned about the individual chemicals that are present. Another fundamental truth is that while one might think that what goes in is what comes out of a product, that's not actually true in many cases. There are a lot of chemical reactions that occur within the product or in the application of a product that don't allow you to fully predict what is going to be emitted from that product. And so over time, people have started to realize that this was a big omission in the early programs. And so a lot of these content-based standards have become really much more rigorous. They're still just concerned with what's going into the product, but a lot of them now have long lists of prohibited chemicals. You can't be certified under a particular content-based standard if you have carcinogens or mutagens or things like that. So many of them have gotten really very, very good. At the same time, it's still true that the only way to know exactly what is coming out of the product is to do emission testing. So the Indoor airPLUS requirements that we have in the program, not just for low-emitting materials but across the board, are really about trying to establish some best practices for builders to help them offer safer and healthier homes. And in the development of the program back in the late 2008-2009 time period, we looked at the third-party programs that are referenced in the spec as those that are particularly designed to try to reduce human exposure indoors to individual VOCs of potential concern for human health effects. So as we did that, while there were some kind of leading programs that are referenced in our spec, as we'll talk about in a minute, there are others that may not be kind of cutting edge, but which are still allowed, and we'll get to that in a second. One of the things that people often don't fully understand is why we require that the low-emitting materials be certified under some third-party program or standard rather than strictly allowing manufacturers to self-certify that they are low VOC or zero VOC. And for all of you who are in the Indoor airPLUS program and the Energy Star program, you know full well that third-party verification has a lot of benefits. It verifies the product claims. It adds credibility to manufacturer claims that they might not otherwise have. It increases transparency. People have a better idea of what it is that's in a product that they're buying or speccing. And the consensus standards really ensure that there's broad stakeholder input and that there's support for the outcome of that. Reducing greenwashing is the ultimate goal. The wild, wild west of the early days of green have really been reduced dramatically because of the use of these third-party programs. They're much more rigorous and much more focused on continuous improvement and trying to really tighten their standards as they go forward. Another reason we rely on them is because EPA doesn't establish emission limits for products used indoors, with an exception I'm going to talk about in a moment. So one of the things, if you've looked at the low emission product resource that we have out there, you may wonder why there's so many labels and programs referenced in the spec. And I think the most important thing for people to understand is this is really designed to provide a range of options. Some of the labels and standards are very rigorous. Some of them are a lower bar. They're content-based. They're still pretty good standards. But we basically are allowing for the market to come up to a place where products that are in use, and there are thousands in the market that home builders need, they need to have availability. So we have a spread of the types of standards that are included in the program at this point in time. The important thing is you don't have to meet all the standards for a product. You only have to meet one of them. And in a lot of cases, and this I'm going to touch on this and then we'll get to the meat of this, but in a lot of cases what we're really talking about here is lots of programs are actually certifying to the same underlying standard. And two that you're going to hear a lot about and that are the easiest for you to see in the marketplace and identify as compliant products are the CARB Phase 2 formaldehyde standards from California, and another test method, which is the California Specification 1350 for emissions. And these two standards appear in lots of the programs and the labels that are in that resource, and we try to kind of demystify that for you, and Nick will show you how that actually works. The important thing is that in order for a product to be compliant, it has to be verified under one of the identified standards or certifications in Section 6. You have to be able to make that link between that product and one of these certifications. A lot of folks, I think, are relying just on finding a low VOC text on a label, or a no VOC or a zero VOC on a product label. And while that doesn't mean that the product isn't compliant or doesn't meet one of the standards, you can't just look at a low VOC claim on a label and assume that that product is compliant unless you are able to make the link to the underlying standard or certification that is compliant. So CARB 2 is, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to give Nick enough time, but this is the standard that California established that they have been tightening over the course of years. It is currently considered the standard for formaldehyde emissions in the United States, but it is about to get superseded, which I'll mention here in a minute. But right now, the Phase 2, CARB Phase 2 or CARB 2, when you see that on a product, that means they're compliant with the stringent emission limits that went into effect in California in 2010, 2012. They're widely available all over the country, even though it's a California standard. So these complying materials, and it's the standard applies to the core board or the raw material used in the finished goods, but the complying materials must be used in the finished goods, and those compliant products have to be labeled. So I mentioned that it's about to be superseded. Well, we just finally published the federal composite wood standard that was required under Title VI of the Toxic Substances Control Act. It was just signed about 2 weeks ago, July 27th, and that is a federal standard. It will apply in all 50 states. The emission limits match the CARB 2 standards, and that was required by statute. And within a year, most composite wood products that are sold, supplied, or offered for sale in the U.S. will need to be labeled as TSCA Title VI compliant. So this will be an additional compliance option, and it'll apply to hardwood, plywood, medium density fiberboard, and particle board, as well as household and other finished goods containing these products. But the key part of this is, once in effect, this is going to be a standard across the entire United States, so every composite wood product will comply. So it will no longer be at all even an issue for Indoor airPLUS or other labeling programs that are focused on formaldehyde. This is where you can just go to epa.gov formaldehyde and you can download that rule. All right, almost to the end and turning it over to Nick. The second really important, probably from an indoor air perspective, this is the most important underlying standard that is used in a lot of the programs that are out there. You'll see it in most of the ones that are in the resource that are at a higher level. Many of these programs and labels have tiered degrees of rigor. The highest levels are always going to be based on Section 1350. And you'll see it as Nick goes through it. But this is really considered, while it's not perfect, and the people who developed it will be the first to say it, it is the current best practice for evaluating emissions for products. So CARB 2, California 1350, you find that certification on any of these products and you are good to go. And you have other options as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick now, but before I do, I want to just, as we get into the complexity of all of this and figuring out what product you can spec, keep in mind that this isn't the kind of stuff we're trying to communicate to the home buyer. We want to keep it simple. That what we're offering, what you as builders are offering, are building materials that are lower emitting, that are going to lower exposure to VOCs, reduce the potential for health problems, and minimize chemical smell in the home, among other benefits. But I think the important part of this is you're about to see just how easy it can be to find these products. Nick, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Can you see my screen now okay? Looks like it's showing up. Well, here are the requirements. We're going to walk through Section 6, and it's fairly straightforward. We have kind of 3 key requirements with a fourth one that has been recently recommended with Revision 3. So we'll touch on each of these sections, and we'll also look at the resource that Bob mentioned earlier. And if you joined late, in your toolbar is a handout section. You can download either the full specification itself or the How to Find Indoor airPLUS Compliant Low Emissions Products resource as well, so check those out. Section 6.1 deals with composite wood. So these are all the structural panels, cabinetry, shelving and trim and doors and stair treads. Some people forget about some of those smaller components. They are many times often composite wood as well. Section 6.2 deals with interior paints and finishes. And with this, we're dealing only with site-applied coatings, not anything that was applied off-site and brought to the home. But as Bob mentioned, you can't simply rely on something that says low VOC. Section 6.3 deals with carpet and carpet adhesives. It's fairly simple nowadays to find a CRI green label or green label plus. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then 6.4 is adhesives and sealants, and these are recommended but not yet required. So we'll jump into that in a second. Let's look at composite woods first. This is a snapshot of that resource that we've been discussing, and I'll just outline the general format of it for you so you can kind of get familiar with the layout. Up here at the top is the requirement. So this is basically the specification itself for Indoor airPLUS. In this case, for structural plywood and OSB, you want to use products certified as compliant with PS1 or PS2 and made with the moisture-resistant adhesives indicated by Exposure 1 or exterior. And so this is the APA, the American Plywood Association, PS1 or PS2. And over here on the right side, we try to include labels and a little bit more description for you to be able to find these products. This is very standard in the market, and for those of you who are on the call who are builders, you'll see this label regularly. You might be hard-pressed to find sheathing out there that doesn't have this label on. So this is a very small lift. Again, you're looking for PS1 or PS2. Here's an example of floor sheathing, 3/4 inch OSB. So these are very common in the market. Hardwood plywood, on the other hand, is something that you might require a little bit more research on when you're first getting into Indoor Plus or trying to find low emission materials, but you'll find they're also readily available. For Indoor airPLUS compliance, you have two options here, and always look for the ORs in the spec or in this resource. The first option here is the ANSI HPVA standard, and then the second one is the California Airborne Toxins Control Measure, which Bob mentioned, the California ATCM. So you're looking for the ANSI HPVA or CARB 2, and on this particular label, which is just taken off of an image, you'll see meets CARB Phase 2 requirements, and even down here in the right-hand corner meets ANSI HPVA 2009. So they're both represented on this particular one. You can click on that link when you download the PDF to find additional products that are compliant as well. Here's a few examples from big box stores, at least. You can see this one from Home Depot, CARB certified Phase 2 right there on the side, very obvious. It's even labeled on the hang tag. Here's another example of flooring that's also hardwood plywood. So flooring might be different types of composite materials. Might be MDF, might have hardwood plywood in it. In this case, you look on the package, and it does say HPVA certified, CARB Phase 2. So moving down through composite woods to particle board and MDF, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, but also you have a few more options in this regard too. So with particle board MDF, you're looking for CARB Phase 2, California ATCM, or there's two ANSI standards. One is ANSI A208.1, that's for particle board, and its companion 208.2 for MDF. So here's an image of a tag where it might be hard to read, but it does say conforms to particle board formaldehyde emission requirements of ANSI 208.1. So that would be one option. Another third option is the Eco-Certified label, the Eco-Certified Composite Sustainability Standard, and that's by the CPA, the Composite Panel Association. So if you have the resource here, you can click on that link, and when I clicked on it yesterday, just to confirm, I found 24 manufacturers listed. So if you're a larger volume builder and you want to go straight to the source to get a better deal, you can find a number of companies there, a number of manufacturers listed that have these products, that have eco-certified products. Aside from those, you can find NAF, ULEF. These are no added formaldehyde products or ultra-low emission formaldehyde. And I'll mention those a little bit more in detail in the next slide. You can find those also at a similar website, and that link there. There's 32 manufacturers that sell NAF or ULEF products. What you want to be careful of is those that have no added urea formaldehyde, NAUF. So with revision 3, there were some additional notes added in the specifications that kind of help detail this a little bit more clearly. So you can see a screenshot here from the specs that kind of talk about no added formaldehyde, NAF, and ultra low emitting formaldehyde. These are products that have emissions that are consistently below CARB Phase 2 standards, and they're actually specifically exempt from the California ATCM. So they are compliant with Indoor airPLUS. Those that are labeled as no added urea formaldehyde, urea formaldehyde being one type, phenol formaldehyde being another. Urea formaldehyde generally considered, the worst actor of the two, but this only means that they've not added any urea formaldehyde, not necessarily phenol formaldehyde. They're not necessarily compliant with the CARB standards, and they're not specifically addressed by CARB, so they are also not compliant with Indoor airPLUS. So there's a number of different new acronyms and letters to sort through, but as you're looking and shopping around, I think you take this resource with you for reference, and just look for those that are no added formaldehyde or ultra low emitting formaldehyde, or some of the other third-party labels we already mentioned. And then the fourth one in this section is GreenGuard or GreenGuard Gold, and you'll see this come up in other sections of the spec as well. So you can visit the UL website if you're looking for GreenGuard products, and sort a number of different ways by manufacturers, brands, product category, and you can find all kinds of adhesives and sealants, cabinetry, countertops, flooring that are GreenGuard or GreenGuard Gold labeled. So another great option. So what about flooring materials? You'll see, we mentioned flooring a little bit earlier with hardwood flooring. You'll see GreenGuard show up fairly regularly with composite flooring and composite wood. Here's one example of a CARB Phase 2, printed very small on a box, but you can find it. Particle board, melamine in particular, is another one to consider. Some people often forget that it is a composite wood. It's used regularly in shelving materials. Here's one that is CARB 2 compliant, so they are also available and in the market. MDF, if any of you have ever worked with MDF for an extended period of time, you may have experienced some type of respiratory issue. I have in the past when I've done a lot of cutting and shelving work. Running MDF through a table saw, it really does produce a fair amount of dust in the air, but there's the formaldehyde issue with this as well. So there are, fortunately, a lot of great products out in the market now. Here's one from Georgia Pacific. You can see a full palette of this. And on the side of it, it actually shows that it meets 3 of these labels: the Eco-Certified label, CARB Phase 2, and the ANSI standard. Wainscot panel is another one. Trim products, baseboard, all those types of pieces that go into our house that are more dimensionally stable when they come in a composite wood form. Sometimes easier to apply, but you do need to look for the compliance. So when we move on to cabinetry, this is kind of a sort of a subset of composite wood. And again, we have all of the options available that we just saw. So cabinet components that comply with the appropriate standard above. That's the ANSI standards, the ECC label, or GreenGuard Gold. But then there's a few other labels as well that we can look for. One of them that you might see in the market a lot is the KCMA label. So the KCMA Environmental Stewardship Program, that's the green label there. You don't want to confuse that with the blue KCMA label. That's their kind of standard cabinetry certification. Look for the green Environmental Stewardship Program label with the tree. So, another great link there to find those products. And then again, GreenGuard or GreenGuard Gold specifically for cabinetry. It's another place to look. And if you shop around, you'll again see these labels: the KCMA, the standard label, and also the ESP program label. Sometimes you'll find these tags, these compliance tags, on the back side of cabinets. In this case, this meets California 93-120 for formaldehyde. So this one is compliant. but it's really important from the beginning for the builder to know what it is they're purchasing and to communicate that with the rater, especially if the only place that this label is seen is on the back side of the cabinet. So once it's installed, you want to make sure that you have good documentation, verification of that up front. Work with your rater or verifier so they know what it is you're putting in, so they can kind of feel confident about the checklist process itself. So I think we have time for a real quick composite wood quiz. You're not going to be able to participate in this quiz other than to give yourself a pat on the back if you answer these right. But is there a laminate flooring requirement in indoor airPLUS? It's a trick question, sort of. It's really no. There's no laminate flooring requirement per se, but if it does contain composite wood in your laminate floor, it needs to, whether it's MDF, particle board, or hardwood plywood, then yes. And if so, you're going to look for CARB 2, Green Guard, or the ANSI 208.2 standard. The next one for the raters are how do I verify compliant hardwood plywood? What do I look for to verify it? You want to look for the ANSI HPVA 2009 label or CARB 2. Two options there. And then how do I verify cabinetry from a rater? A very simple one is look for the KCMA label, or again look for CARB 2 for cabinetry. Green Guard is another option, of course. So that kind of takes us through composite woods. We're going to move on to 6.2, interior paints and finishes, and kind of on a regular basis, we get questions about paints and whether or not they're compliant with indoor airPLUS. And I think this resource should help those of you who are considering switching paints or not quite sure what you're using right now to kind of dive in and investigate this. So there's a number of them. You see a few of them here. And the specific requirement is at least 90% of the interior surface area covered by site-applied paints or coatings should use low or no VOC products certified by one of the following. So again, it's not just low VOC or no VOC, but it has to have one of these certifications. Green Guard is on the list. The Indoor Advantage Gold label is on this list. And then also California Section 1350. If you find something based on that underlying standard, which is again that emissions-based standard, that is compliant. And there is a database, the CHIPS list, CHPS, Collaborative for High Performance Schools. They do have a list of California 1350 certified products, so check those out. A few other third-party certification labels are the Green Seal Standard, GS11, then also GreenWise and GreenWise Gold products, and then the Master Painters Institute has two different levels of certifications as well. And I think it's important to note, as Bob mentioned earlier, that not all these standards are alike. They are not all necessarily equivalent in terms of content or emissions. Some of them are strictly content-based standards, but they are backed up by third-party verification and have some additional requirements. Some of them go to the extent of doing emissions testing as well. So at this point in the program's evolution, there's a wide range of third-party labels available. So it should give you some good options for compliant paints. Here's a few examples off the shelf. Valspar has a Green Guard tag on the back of one of their cans here. They also have an MPI labeled paint. A number of different manufacturers use different certification standards. Here's an example of one that says at the bottom, 0 VOC to 100% acrylic. It's a low VOC product according to the details on the back, but it doesn't necessarily have one of the third-party labels that we looked at earlier. If you go to a different product from the same brand, you can see that they do have one that's both low VOC and Green Guard Gold certified. So again, not just because one brand has one product that might be certified to that label doesn't mean all their products are. So you do need to do a little bit of homework. Here's a common paint primer, Zinsser 123. Here you see on the back it has the Earthwise, the Rust-Oleum Earthwise designation. And that's not on the list for Indoor airPLUS currently. It's kind of an in-house designation. But if you look closer, it does have the MPI certification on the back of this as well. And if I wasn't quite sure, and I wanted to do a little bit more investigation, I could go to the MPI website, and you can find that link again in your product resource there in the handouts. And you do a little bit further investigation, and you can find all of the paints, or all the primers in this case, that are certified, and you can see which standard they're certified to. So in this case, we're looking for GPS 1 or GPS 2, and the Zinsser Bullseye 123 does meet GPS 1. So again, a lot of great options that you can find online. Moving on to carpet, 6.3. Carpet is pretty straightforward. We're looking for the CRI Green Label Plus, or Green Label standard, and you'll see that little emblem on the back of a lot of carpet. Not all, but it's out there at the big box stores and at more local suppliers as well. It might not be the emblem itself, it might just be stated on the product CRI Green Label Plus approved. So this is for carpet and carpet cushion both. Here you can see a few other examples on the hang tags. If you're a builder that gives your homeowner, your home buyer, some options with carpets, it's important to consider that on the front end as you're getting into Indoor airPLUS. So one thing you want to consider is, what options am I going to provide, what range of options am I going to give the consumer, so that they can confidently go find something to purchase that will meet the spec and won't arrest certification at the very end of the process. So if you send them out to find their own carpet, make sure that you identify Green Label, the CRI Green Label, as an option that they should be looking for. And they might be looking at a whole bunch of different labels and logos. Some are going to say made with recycled materials, which is great, made with renewable materials, conserves natural resources. But the one we want to get is the CRI Green Label or Green Label Plus, and then they'll go to look for that on the range of options at the supplier. Sometimes it's in smaller print on some of these labels. You do have to look closely. In this case, Stainmaster has it across a number of different cushions. So that kind of covers all three of the primary components of Section 6 of Indoor airPLUS, and at least gives you an overview of the low emission material resource. There is, again, that added adhesives and sealants recommendation that has come into revision 3 of the program, and with the evolution of the program, when it started, adhesives and sealants that were low VOC, low emission, it wasn't apparent that they were necessarily going to be in the market right away, but they are now becoming a lot more readily available. So this advisory was put in and may become part of the Indoor airPLUS requirements in a future version of the program. So, so it's good to get ahead of this now. So while currently not required by Indoor airPLUS, EPA recommends that at least 90% of the site-applied interior adhesives and sealants be low VOC or no VOC. And here are 3 of those standards to look for. Again, California Section 1350, Green Seal, or Green Guard Gold. And here's just a quick example of this in the market. You'll see this on a lot of products that are adhesives and sealants. If you're looking for more technical resources, more information, whether it's about Section 6, the low emission materials, or about any of the other pieces of Indoor airPLUS, we'd highly recommend going to the Building America Solutions Center. The DOE has built out a great database and resource with technical material for builders, for home energy raters, for anybody interested in high performance homes. There's guides from A to Z covering all kinds of different building components, as well as the specifications themselves for Indoor airPLUS, for Energy Star certified homes. And if you're going to take the next step to do zero energy ready homes, there's great content information there as well. So check those out. And also, if you're wanting more information on tools and resources for marketing in particular, visit the Indoor airPLUS website. There's consumer brochures, there's website widgets, there's former podcasts and videos that have been done that you can read up a little bit about Indoor airPLUS, or communicate those to your home buyer. There's also a great sales training kit that came out this past year that you can find in your My Energy Star account, so check those out as well. And then as you continue to develop your familiarity with the program and are building and rating Indoor airPLUS homes and using that marketing material, you should certainly consider applying for the annual Indoor airPLUS Leader Award. These are some of the top leaders that have been building and rating Indoor airPLUS this past year. This award cycle just ended this past spring, so congratulations to them, and would encourage you all to look in next winter when it comes around again. And then if you do have any other questions about the program, certainly visit the website, but don't be afraid also to email the inbox. And again, these slides will be sent out afterwards, so you have all the links. Indoor_airPLUS at EPA.gov is the Indoor airPLUS inbox, and the team will certainly try to get back to you and answer your question as soon as we can. So I think that covers the program for today. Kat, are there any questions that have come in thus far?
No, not yet. So feel free to either chat them or put them in the question box, either one, and we will get to those. Or feel free to email us later on, and we'll respond to you as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Bob, any further notes or comments regarding the low emission material resource or the specs? If not, I think we will probably call it closed for today. Thank you all again for joining, and do feel free to email us if you have any additional questions about the program. It's been great to be with you here today. Thanks again.